Today we have a very, very special episode and two very special guests. Professor Arthur O'Connor, who's the academic director at the School of Professional Studies and manages the Master of Science in Data Science and also the Bachelor of Science in Information Systems, and the one and only Professor Jason Bryer, PhD, who's also in our faculty full-time, dedicated to data science and many other things. And as you can tell from Jason's background, he truly is a Renaissance man. He's an avid guitar player, but so is Arthur. Arthur, I don't know if you can show us your background with the guitars. No? They're both musicians. And Jason is also a photographer. So I don't know where you find the time, Jason, to conduct research on AI and data science, but we're really grateful that you are part of the SPS community. And Arthur has prepared a quick presentation on AI, which I am going to share now on the screen. We want to go through some fundamentals of the topic, and then we'll open it up for Q&A and for a conversation on the pros and cons of this new technology. And I say new in quotes because AI, as we will learn, is something that we have been using for quite some time. I imagine some of you remember when you in grade school or middle or high school used handheld calculators. Well, that is an early version of artificial intelligence. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a specific area of that, what Jason would call a marketing term, right? AI, which is ChatGPT. We presume that most of you in the audience have either heard of the term or even used ChatGPT already. So with that, I will include the stream, the presentation, and let Arthur take us through some of these materials. I do want to remind everyone that if you have any questions for Jason or Arthur or myself, please add it to the comment section, and we will do our best to respond to it. So with that, Arthur, take it away.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Jorge, for setting up and moderating this discussion, and all of you who have joined us this morning. For the first 5 minutes, as Jorge said, I'd like to quickly go through a handful of slides just to sort of touch upon some of the just basic aspects of this type of new and one of the most popular and powerful chatbots, ChatGPT. And we're going to ask you if you could just hold off your questions to the end of the slides. Again, they're just a handful of slides, so that we can quickly move on to the more important part of this discussion, which is the Q&A part. What is it? It's a variant of something called a generative pre-training transformer model. Transformer models are a type of neural network that is useful in analyzing sequence of tokens or words in a sentence. It uses something called supervised reinforcement learning. Translated into English, that means that supervised learning labels data in order to get a certain prediction of accuracy, and then the correct information is fed back to improve that accuracy. Reinforcement learning is a form of sort of policy machine learning, where it creates incentives, rewards and punishments for achieving an end goal, usually by just trial and error. And there's something called proximal policy optimization, which is actually a human intervened reinforcement learning process to fine tune the model to make it even more human-like and sounding. And there's the source of that slide for those of you who want to sort of look into that. What can it do? It is amazing at generating and summarizing content. It can clean and process, analyze large data sets. It's pretty good to great at writing short things, reports, articles, memos, Q&As. It can summarize text presented in a certain style. And it's really good at coding, particularly snippets and scripts, and sometimes complete programs. And it continues to evolve. And you can see in the bottom of the slide the earlier versions of GPT 3, which used a smaller amount of parameters. And you could see from that slide that people could guess 3/4 of the time whether something was fake or real, generated by humans versus generated by a machine. And when you get to 175 billion parameters, it's almost half and half. It's very difficult. And some people have called this the demise of the expert class, meaning that just anyone can sound like an expert. And you've heard stories about how ChatGPT was used to pass a medical exam or a bar exam, or got a good grade on a paper at Wharton MBA. And this at a time when people are losing confidence in institutions and authoritative sources is a bit disconcerting. But it's also important to understand what it can't do. And it's not current, not yet anyway. So if you ask it something like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it doesn't know. That hasn't happened yet in its world. The quality varies based on the type of task and the way the prompts are worded. Prompts are very sensitive. And in fact, you can get extensions to improve the way you phrase a question. It is not good at complex numeric computation. It's not really designed for numbers. It's good to very good at producing short stories and very good at coding. But the important thing is it doesn't create anything new. It just mimics human expression based on what it's been written. The word choices are solely based on modified, fine-tuned conditional probabilities. Conditional probability, if you remember from your high school statistics, if this happens and this happens, what's the probability of the next thing happening? So it understands the rules of language, not the context or understanding of the knowledge. And Jason will be quick to point out that he kind of sees it as a word calculator. And you're right, it's not. It's not artificial general intelligence. My favorite description of it was someone who called it an amazingly conversant parrot. So it can really talk to you about just about any topic at all, but it has no idea what it's saying. It can't gather first information, and then most importantly, it's not always accurate. So there's a great quote in that NPR article saying, it'll give you a very impressive sounding answer, but it's just plain wrong. So what are the threats? Well, the immediate threat is what's called, AI jurism. AI-assisted plagiarism, which I'll talk to in the next slide. The longer term is it raises uncomfortable questions. How well do established teaching practices really measure students' attainment of knowledge and critical thinking? Is writing the best way to learn and demonstrate learning? What is the value add at a time when many institutions of higher learning are facing some real serious challenges? But the opportunity is amazing. I mean, teaching students how to best use it to provide personal tutoring and learning experiences, it is amazing. And I don't know if this link won't work in this presentation, but if I asked an AI tool to create this presentation, and it with cyberpunk images no allowed, and it's a wonderful presentation on ChatGPT and how it can be worked in higher ed, and it took less than 12 seconds to produce this slideshow, which I encourage you to see because it is an amazing slideshow. So what are the strategies to combat plagiarism? And they're just tend to fall into 4 categories. This list is by no means comprehensive. There's just banned by policy. Fiat communist China has prevented the use of it, as U.S. public school systems in New York City, Seattle, and other. There's detection, where you can watermark the information. There are contact detectors that are not very good. And more disturbingly, there are countermeasures like Quillbot, which are really good at defeating the content detectors. And then there's good old-fashioned test monitoring back in the day. Again, a much better or another strategy is AI literacy, where you establish clear guidelines to know how to use this. And then technique that we've used quite frequently in the data science program is just you create opportunities to assess the thinking and understanding throughout the learning process. So it's an iterative checkpoints of assessment, not necessarily grading. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jorge for the questions and answers.
Well, thank you so much, Arthur. And I must say, you shared a lot of information in just 5 minutes. There's a lot here to digest, but I think what's critically important for all of us in the audience, and again, I presume that there are different levels of knowledge and experience with ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is just one of many other tools that are coming out right now. There are tools that also do text to image, as Arthur mentioned. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I can share my screen. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I'm going to share a window on my screen of another open AI tool, which is called DALL-E. And DALL-E, in this case, is a tool that converts, hopefully you can see it here, that converts text to image. So the question I asked DALL-E was, can you prepare or draw a version of a graduate with diploma, but a version that mimics Picasso, in this case the first one, that mimics Andy Warhol, that mimics Vincent van Gogh, and then mimics again Warhol, and finally Matisse. You know, so the possibilities, and this is just a very simple example of the type of things that can be done, but it is, in my opinion, something that will serve many purposes. There will be good actors, and there will be bad actors. This can be used, as Arthur mentioned, for good causes and bad causes, for improving information, but also for improving disinformation. So Jason, I thought maybe you can share with us your perspective on the GPT and other open AI and other competitors. This is also becoming a race. Google has already declared what they call a code red, which means they see the threat, particularly because Microsoft is one of the biggest investors in OpenAI. They invested $1 billion and have announced, or at least the press has announced, that there's a likelihood that they will add an additional $10 billion in investment. So no doubt their interest is adding this capability to the Microsoft suite, including the Bing search engine. So if that happens, then that could be the first real threat to Google as a search engine in quite some time. Also, Amazon is looking at it. There are many competitors coming out. So Jason, can you maybe share with us what can we expect in this brave new world, in this hyper hyped brave new world, I would call it, because this came out in November. ChatGPT in particular came out in November, and I think is the steepest of all the most recent technologies.
The fastest for adoption.
Yeah.
Most accounts in the shortest amount of time, I think, were created on OpenAI.
Yeah. So we're users in 5 days or something absurd like that. So can you share with us, Jason, a little bit of your perspective on it?
Sure. I'm trying to take a little bit more of a measured approach in that this is just it's sort of trying to see the forest from the trees, and we just walked into a giant tree, and it's impressive and we're in awe of it. But we've had these kind of milestones all along. I remember when I was in high school, when Word added spell checker, and teachers were like, oh no, what are we going to do? We don't teach spelling in the same way we did when I was a kid. And so we just learned to adapt and move. I think we're going to find that these tools will be tremendously useful. I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and she was mentioning how awesome this would be, for our dissertations. We spent a lot of time reading articles and trying to summarize them, where if we could have a tool that gave us a starting point to kind of go through a giant bit of literature, that would be great. Now, in terms of like my colleagues, if I use in my course what I would call authentic assessments. My assessments try to mimic the profession. If you're in a profession where ChatGPT can do that work well, I would be very worried for sure. In the same way, people who were calculators, when the spreadsheet came out, or accountants came out, they were just essentially fancy calculators, and then the spreadsheet came out and they adapted to it and had to learn laws and rules and other approaches, and the profession just adapted. I think we're going to see the same thing with ChatGPT and these kinds of other machine learning algorithms, that we're just going to find a way to use it and make the next step. And I think something that's really important that Arthur pointed out in his slide deck, ChatGPT is only working on what has been created, right? It has essentially copied the internet and is just mimicking the internet. It is not going to create new knowledge, right? That's humans are still going to be doing that. When we get to general AI, then I might be a little bit more worried, and we have a lot of science fiction movies that kind of tell us how that path might go.
Now, Jason, let me ask you. You the other day when we were preparing for this interview, you said something that I found fascinating, which was a very, very easy way to understand how this technology works. It's based on probabilities. So this computer would do in microseconds an analysis of everything that is out there, and based on everything that the machine can virtually read online, it will come to a guess of what the next word should be on the sentence. Maybe you can expand a little bit on that explanation, because I found it very useful to understand how this technology works.
So, I mean, I think Word has been doing this for quite a while. Or actually, if you go to do a Google search, right, and you start typing a phrase, it has been doing autocomplete for a while. And that's probably the most basic version. And, Google did it based upon what other people are querying the system with. What ChatGPT and other, these other transformer-based systems is now created essentially a giant database or network of how words and phrases are connected. So it's not simply so the original autocomplete is, well, let's look at these set of tokens, 55% chance the next word is this, based upon prior searches. And so OpenAI has now created this network of every available written text that's on the internet. So it's just a much more sophisticated way of calculating the probability of what the next word should be, given the previous words and given the prompt that came from it. So again, that goes to that point where ChatGPT is not going to create knowledge. It's really great at summarizing other things. So there are some really interesting tools. There's a new search engine, for example, that is doing a lot of what like ChatGPT is. It's like giving you that summary, right? Google's been trying to do this for a long time. They have what they call the knowledge graph, right? When you do a search, and really it's just been a summary of Wikipedia. And now why I think Google is worried is that this provides a great way of summarizing things in a broader context. Now, these new search engines, I think it's a Viewer or something like that, actually gives you citations, which I think is really important. Yep. That's another problem with ChatGPT is it sounds correct a lot of the time. It's really can be confidently wrong, I think. Yes, and it's just mimicking human language, right? When people write on the internet, we write a lot of things confidently. And
it does write with significant authority, right?
You
really feel that you're getting the correct answer. But we have a very engaged audience, putting a lot of comments. And if you have any questions, again, put it on the chat, and we'll do our best. But I do want to address one in particular raised by Laura Todd. She says supposedly ChatGPT is getting better with math calculations too. We have talked about text so far, but as Arthur quickly mentioned, and maybe you can expand on that, Arthur, this technology is also being used for coding. So I would imagine some of your faculty, in particular, those who teach computer programming, might be looking at this more profoundly in terms of how it can be incorporated for good, and how can we prevent academic integrity issues on the other side. So, Arthur, can you expand a little bit on how the technology has or is evolving beyond just text?
Well, the way I look at it in terms of learning coding is that we've used these development environments where you learn the syntax and how to express something, and then the development environment will reject it, saying no, that's not how you do it. You failed. Try again, and you sort of by trial and error you learn how to do it. What this tool could do is really help students phrase a prompt the correct way to say, I want to write this snippet of code. Could you please do that for me? And then it'll produce the code. And what we're trying to do at the end of the day is teach students how to best learn tools to be more productive. So if that means, learning how to use the tool rather than learning the exact syntax of how to phrase something in R, where you put the period before rather than the period afterwards, that's fine with us. We're willing to embrace that.
Yeah, and I see in the comment section, in particular, Milena Cuellar is putting a few comments that I think are very valid in terms of what the ChatGPT was intended to do and not do in terms of coding. So again, this is just getting started. I do believe, at least on the ChatGPT version, that we're on version 3.5, but OpenAI has announced that, or not has announced, it has been rumored that OpenAI might be ready to launch ChatGPT 4.0 later in the year.
Yeah, I read that too.
So this is moving extremely, extremely fast. I mean, this came out just a couple months ago. It has revolutionized academia for sure. There's a lot of concern about academic integrity. Actually, Dino is asking, does CUNY have a formal policy for AI ChatGPT used by students in our classes? That is a conversation that is ongoing right now. We do have policies to prevent plagiarism and to prevent academic dishonesty. And the language that exists in the policy today does apply to every type of tool, including ChatGPT and others that we have been discussing today. So the policy is there. It's just the execution and implementation of that policy that's going to be a bit trickier in this new environment. But one thing that
can I address issues? Michael is asking if we're worried about this becoming Skynet.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm not worried yet. There's I think, because I'm very interested in how we estimate causality. That's sort of one of my statistical research areas. And how human beings establish causality is, I think, still an open question in the brain literature, in the psychology literature, right? If I go to the Bronx Zoo, right, I make a causal inference that if I jump in the lion pit, I'm going to die. But I've never actually observed that. And how does the brain make that causal inference, right? We sort of evolved in this way, probably coming out of caves, that we're wary of that, and we make a lot of causal inferences based upon very little data. And when we can design computer algorithms that can do that, that's when I think Skynet becomes a problem. But we don't even know how humans do it. So if we don't know how humans do it, it's going to be hard to write a computer algorithm to do that. Again, it's like, think of this as a word calculator. It's really doing fancy pattern matching, and it's, we can throw more data at it. And Arthur had the slide of how large these data sets are, measured in gigabytes, terabytes, and now probably petabytes of information.
Yeah, and I think there's a recognition as well, going back to academic integrity, realization from the major developers of AI tools that they also need to account for the wrong use of the technology. So, for instance, OpenAI has recently announced that they are developing a system by which text generated by GPT will have a watermark. There's a student who, over the holidays, a Princeton student who, over the holidays, developed an application called Chat Zero that also gives you, again, in terms of probabilities, gives you a score of whether the content was produced by a human or by a machine. And I've personally done a few tests with it, and it's pretty accurate. So I'm sure there will be many tools that will be effective at identifying what is original human generated content and what's computer generated. But this has many implications also within academia, within higher ed, in many other sectors. But it has the opportunity to provide us with tools that would allow us to be much more efficient and effective and focused on where we add the most value. So I'm sure both Arthur and Jason and myself included, we do a lot of tasks on a daily basis that could potentially be done by some of these tools, and would liberate our time so that we can spend that time in more value-adding activities. So more strategic thinking, maybe more research, things that right now we might not be able to do because the day has so many hours, right? So in that sense, I am optimistic. There's certainly, as Arthur said, threats, but there are also many opportunities for proper use of this technology. I think the one that probably would concern me the most is the capacity for disinformation, for content creators using social media and other platforms to share disinformation using this tool. But I'm confident that there will be measures to prevent that from expanding aggressively. So let me see if there are any additional questions on the chat. As I said, we only have half an hour, and we're just scratching the surface. This is just the proverbial tip of the iceberg. So I am sure Arthur and Jason would be glad to participate in a follow-up to this discussion, maybe a part 2 or even a part 3. At SPS, we will also have an opportunity to discuss this topic with the entire faculty in the next couple of weeks. So I hope that you all stay in touch with SPS. If anyone would like to reach out to either you, Arthur, or you, Jason, where would that be the best, or how would that be the best way to get a hold of you?
You can always email me, and I'm a recent convert to Mastodon. So if you go to my website, I have a link to Mastodon in lieu of Twitter.
Okay.
If you want a public conversation.
For those of us who are not familiar with Mastodon, can you?
Oh boy, maybe we should just have another interview on Mastodon. It's an open, federated. You can think of it as a version of Twitter. And my community has moved from Twitter to Mastodon, given certain things happening over there.
Excellent. And how about you, Arthur? Best way to
good old-fashioned email. Arthur.O'Connor@CUNY.edu.
Okay, I'm going to put it on the comment section. Arthur.O'Connor@CUNY.edu.
No apostrophe in the O'Connor. Computers don't like us Irish people.
They don't. No.
Yeah, mine's just jason.bryer@cuny.edu, or the Mastodon is at jbryer@viz.social.
Well, keep the music going. By the way, it also produces music. I learned recently that you can do text to music or text to audio. So even musicians might find this
not very well yet, thankfully. So if this academic job doesn't work out, I'll go back to be a musician.
It's getting better though.
Well, thank you both for your wealth of information and wisdom.
Thank you for the
there definitely will be a part 2 to our audience. Thank you so much for joining